You're listening to the Discussing the Resilient podcast, hosted by Aidan Smalling and William Reid, a competitive 40k podcast for the servants of Nurgle and the fallen 14th Legion. Tactics, meta-analysis, and all things Death Guard. Hi guys, welcome back to the Discussing the Resilient podcast. This one's a bit different, so it's just me, Will. Aidan's not on this particular recording. Obviously, Aidan's been doing his own sort of solo series with in regards to the Death Guard fundamentals, and also a lot of live streams covering his games, and you know that there's some of the bigger tournaments he's going to. Kind of approaching them from a bottom to top kind of approach. Obviously, you know he's sort of tailoring things towards sort of newer players as well. But with Aidan obviously being a more elite player himself, sometimes obviously it's good to maybe sort of see things with a different perspective. Obviously, I'm not the calibre of player that Aidan is. I don't pretend to be in any way, shape or form. But at the same time, I am, I definitely perform better than the average sort of Death Guard player, on a whole. Often through trial and error. Now, I learn very differently from Aidan. I believe I do anyway. Aidan might question that, of course. I learn by doing. I don't learn by reading. I can read a data sheet 100 times and I can take the general gist in, but to actually sort of like learn, I learn from making mistakes. Basically, I'm one of these people, and or doing things right, sort of noticing things that went well, things that went wrong. Now, the reason I decided to start this series, series, sort of a season and series, sort of merged into one, that new word there. The reason I decided to start this was because obviously, as we talked about in the previous episode with Aidan, I went 1 and 2 an RTT. Now, normally, especially at the end of ninth, I would have expected to go 2 and 1 at a minimum, if not go 3 and 0. But it's a new addition. As I say, I'm a kind of person who learns by doing. And the reality is, I haven't played as many games as 10th I would have liked, especially not with Death Guard, because as much as we are a podcast that's dedicated toward Death Guard, I'll be honest, I've a horrible suspicion that during parts of ninth, I might have been the person in the world who took Death Guard to more tournaments than anyone else. I went to a lot of tournaments. I was very loyal to Death Guard. Now, as much as I think there might be some truth to that, and I have a worrying feeling that it could be, the reason it's worrying is because my ranking for someone who took Death Guard to that many events should have probably been a lot higher. But I played them through thick and thin. I played them through, when the points went up, when we expect them to go down, which I can't even tell you when that was, on the 22nd of January. I think probably 2022, I would guess. The reason I know that is because it was actually my birthday, and I got very excited thinking, finally going to have some new points, going to go back towards, being competitive again. Got it really early, sort of got really excited, thinking it was another day of hobby and painting these new models, and yeah, everything went up in points, and it was like, it was literally I wouldn't say the worst day ever, because obviously Warhammer's, it's a fun thing, it's a hobby, one of the things that we'll talk about on this particular series, but it was a bit disheartening, but I did take to events. During that time, I played against people, played against good players, played against Dan from Glasshammer, and I always remember his comment being the best when I had my army on the table. He had Harlequins at the point when Void Reavers were, or whether the Harlequin sort of jet bike thing was, stupidly pointed, like 45 points or something. He didn't have that. He had an off-meta list that he was doing quite well with. He said it was the idea was just outscore people. But I had my full army on the table. I ran through the list and he said, "So where's the rest of the army then?" And I was like, "How do you mean?" And he genuinely thought that was half my army. And I was like, "No, mate, this is what you get with 2,000 points of Death Guard at this moment in time." And he couldn't believe it. And that was summed up, at that time. I'm giving that example because that was one of the low points with playing Death Guard at tournaments. Obviously, I was also played the high points. I did reluctantly play the triple Plague Burst Caller and triple Contemptor Dreadnought. I did have an off-meta list I liked before then, which is going to sort of link back this podcast. I'm going to talk about how I like to play the game and what I deem to be fun. But at the same time as deeming things to be fun, I will also admit that it's fun to win. So sometimes, taking the strongest thing gives the best chance of winning is also fun. I've had a number of 4-1s and sort of various other good results over my my time playing Warhammer at tournaments. I've never had a 5-0. I'll be honest. I've never gone undefeated at GT. I've had some 3-0s at RTTs, but never a 5-0 at GT. So, sort of that's a bit of background on me, because obviously everyone knows about Aidan. You just need to look at his ITC record and see that, whereas people who play, especially in the north of England, will probably know my face, maybe my voice. People particularly comment on this podcast how I've got a mix of accents. I guess I was born in Cumbria, lived in the northeast of England, Newcastle, for a long time, and then I live in Manchester now. And I think I've just sort of smashed all three of these really strong northern accents together, and it's a bit of a hodgepodge. Especially because I lived in Berwick-upon-Tweed as well. Actually, it was on the Scottish border, so I think I might even have the odd Scottish word that gets thrown in there. Anyway, I'm just joking about that, because something that seems to have come up a few times. But the reason I'm doing this is to talk more about a sort of, I haven't thought the name this is, might be something like Poxwalker to Plague Marine. The idea being, obviously, at this moment, I'm 1 and 2. I've got a long way to improve. A lot of that with, some errors. I understand it, but I made some errors with the core rules. We talked about on the previous podcast the error I made playing Mikey from Hellstorm, and I have a feeling that I think Mikey talked about on his podcast as well. It's a bit messy me saying I got mentioned on there. So it's one of these things, and I've also made other mistakes in games, practice games in particular, where I've just made silly rules errors. Things that I thought this is how it's worked because that's how it worked in 9th or whatever. And this is because I'm a learner by doing. So sometimes I ask friends questions, and I already have an inkling of the answer. I might suspect it, but I'm either getting confirmation that I'm right or wrong, or sometimes it's because I genuinely don't know. So I do also learn by asking people questions and having things verbalised, having discussions about things. And it's one of these things I thought maybe there's other people out there in the world who think same as me. And I know also there's a large Death Guard contingency who also like threat watch lists. Very different from the kind of style that Aidan plays, where it's very sort of tradey, thinking about points, and probably playing it more like a game of 3D chess, where you're thinking, right, if I do this turn, that sets up next turn, and probably even the turn behind, playing 2 turns ahead of what's happened that moment. Whereas I don't play cerebrally, as I'll be honest. What I do is I like to see the game. I like to play 1 turn ahead, but what I normally do is I think a lot about my deployment, and then with Death Guard being a slower army, this sort of feeds into that. Once it's on the table, sometimes it kind of unfolds the way it unfolds. You have a limited amount of options with particular units. You can go left, you can go right, but generally it's left or right 4 or 5 inches. Maybe it's something like a bloat drone or a rhino, or sort of a larger movement. But generally, it's Death Guard play a very linear game, as I'm sure everyone who's listening to this podcast can agree with. I'm sure everyone here is also fellow Death Guard fanboys and fangals. So the reason I want to talk about this is because I like the idea of trying to track my improvement throughout this edition, because obviously Aidan's going to sort of do the high-end stuff, people who are, already good at the game, how to get better, whilst also helping people at the bottom to sort of like level up. But doing it more of an average Joe kind of podcast with this sort of solo series, talking about how I've started at 1 and 2, and then I want to try and sort of talk through my growing. I've got 3 RTTs booked in next month. 2 confirmed. I think it's going to be 3, which I'll talk through and explain why that matters. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the same list to the 3 RTTs. The reason being, I want to get the point where I'm not thinking about the list. I know the rules in the list, back of my hand, don't have to think about that, and focus on the rules of the game, core rules, rare rules, how things interact, starting to sort of take in sort of the key things from other armies or the things in the meta, how that affects my play style and how I would maybe do differently in the different armies. Because I'm sure other people will be going through the same journey, because as well, the kind of list I'm going to talk about is a skew list. Also, it's something a bit different from the kind of the more surgical list that Aidan plays, where it's, play burst crawlers, clear this bit, and then that means that space, and we fill the space something else, and sort of, I need to trade this, this might not be the most important unit now, but I know on turn 5, I need to clear that because that's how I'm going to win the game by 3 points. I'm talking that there, through the mind of Aidan, or how I presume the mind of Aidan works. Obviously, I don't live in his head. He might live in mine. When we play each other, he beats me quite comfortably, so he probably does live in mine through the through the owning thing that people do in sports and things. Like I say, he definitely owns me when we play each other. But yeah, so I will talk now a bit about the list. So the idea is a skew list. Now, this list has been inspired by other people. It's also been a bit inspired by the list I played at the end of 9th edition. So 9th edition, I think I alluded this before actually, I was a bit sick with Death Guard because I played it all the way through. I was one of these guys, and thick and thin, didn't matter if the rules are good or bad, I would take Death Guard to an event, and I would generally do at least 1 GT every month, if not 2, sometimes even 3, and RTTs anytime there was one within reasonable distance. So like I say, I went to a lot of events around the north of England, Liverpool, Manchester, never Leeds actually, which is surprising, but Newcastle, some other places too, sorry. Obviously there's lots of other places in the north, but these are some of the places I play. Obviously I live very close to Element Games, so Element Games has a lot of tournaments, so I would go and play there regularly. I'm very well known within the community there, and actually recently started a part-time job in the shop there as well, doing Thursday and Friday evenings. So anyone who listens to this who shops at Element, if you wonder who the guy with the weird accent is in the counter, is it the guy from the Death Discussing Brilliant podcast? Yes, it is. So the reason I'm talking about that is at the start of, I stopped playing in the 9th edition a little bit. I missed out the last couple of local tournaments because I was just, the rules that we had obviously weren't the best. They were good, you know, we've discussed previously D for Death Guard tiers, you know, Art of War sort of joke on their podcast and stuff. And you know, I was performing better than average with them, but I was playing them for 3 years and going through the highs and the lows of the various data slates and points decreases, and you know, I was looking for a 10th thinking we were going to get, you know, new super strong rules and I was going to be sort of like reinvigorated, and then obviously it just got worse, you know, as we know. You know, we had some of the worst rules in 10th, you know, everything was overpointed. Obviously a lot of this has been corrected now. Did have some games with 10th as well with them, but I was a bit disheartened. There's a local league. My first game was into the meta of most meta Eldar builds, and I think I've talked on previous episodes, I conceded at the end of my opponent's second turn, and he went first, because the Wraith Knight and the various other bits in his meta list picked up about 70% of my army before I even had my second turn, and it was a bit disheartening. It was still fun. He's a great guy I played against. He's a friend of mine, a guy called Dara. He's a really good guy, but at the same time, it wasn't a fun play. So I do have Chaos Knights, I do have Chaos Space Marines, because when I played as a kid, the reason I got into Death Guard was when I was a 12-year-old boy, I really liked power armored factions, but I like the evil ones, I didn't like the good ones, and I like the look of the Nurgle ones, and I used to play Chaos Space Marines, but everything with the mark of Nurgle is, you know, when you're 12, you know, you don't really think about rules, how it looks, how it's cool. For example, it got joked about actually the other day, if anyone remembers the 2nd edition Chaos Space Marines Codex, there was a Predator with the original Great Unclean one, the one from before Games Workshop were called Games Workshop, I always forget what they used to be called, maybe Rogue Trader, can't remember, but anyway, it's the old, he's a tiny little guy, and he looks like a gremlin from Ghostbusters, the joke was, because in the 2nd edition Codex, obviously like conversions in the Codexes then, and that Great and Clean was stuck to the front of the Predator, and I thought it was the coolest model, so I, you know, through the older guys at the club I played at, managed to source one of those Great and Clean ones. Spent a lot of time in my room hacking them to pieces with hacksaws. I think sliced my finger down the bone at least once, which my mum was furious with me about, because especially after she told me to not play with the toys or the tools that I think I was stealing out my dad's toolbox. But anyway, I have that Predator still with the old Great and Clean on the front, and it looks ridiculous in today's world. It does look like something out of Ghostbusters, someone joked. So hence the tangent of why Death Guard didn't exist. When Death Guard came out as an army, and I was already kind of flirting with, well, I was curious, I was 40k curious, and then when Death Guard came out as an army, I was like, wow, the thing I did as a kid is now actual army, and that was sort of the deal breaker for me, which is one of the reasons why I still play Death Guard. And obviously my older models are Chaos Space Marine models. I have the very old metal Plague Marines from the 90s. They're painted in the colour scheme that used to be on the box that the 5 plastic guys came in, where they're mainly black with each shoulder panel and things done in different colours, because obviously they're a monopore, so they did different colours to mix them up a little bit. So even though they're not monopores, my guys, I've got the expensive Forge World ones, and you know, I spend a lot of money getting bits off Forge World for them as well, because every now and again they break, and they're completely different scale to the newer scopes. But anyway, I ran some Chaos Space Marines, ran some Knights at the start of the edition, because I was very disheartened with Death Guard. But obviously Death Guard are back in the game now. They're not as strong as probably Chaos Space Marines or Knights. So if I did just want to go and win games, I think it would be better with those factions if I just wanted to chase a meta, but that's not what this podcast's about. So I'm going to lead into the list, and I'm going to sort of talk a little bit more about what I'm going to talk about this list. So the idea is I'm going to run this, I'm going to take it to 3 RTTs. I might change for one of them, and that'll talk about why we're going to do it. And I want to sort of track my progression. I'm going to talk a lot about the mistakes I make at these, I'm going to talk a lot about when the list does eventually change, why I'm making the changes. But this particular episode is going to be an introduction to the list. Basically, talking through the list, talking how some of the tactics in my head work. I played one game with it, played against Tau. Tactic played against a guy called James, who's also a podcast listener, who plays Death Guards of the Army. So, hi James, hope you listen to this. The list was really fun, I felt like it was strong. I did win the game, but he wasn't playing the most meta of Tau list. So again, if I was to take to a tournament, that doesn't mean this list smashes Tau. Definitely do not think that. And also, he had some bad rolls on his first turn, which as we get to, this list relies on either going first or having the opponent kind of not have enough guns to kill it. It's heavy armor skew, and it going back on tangent. Sorry, it links to the list I played at the end of ninth, where I talked about going 4-1 at the Manchester GT, where it was a combat list. It kind of rushed at people. It was really good in the World Eaters. Had a shooting platform at the back of it that kind of kept people honest. Kept firing lanes clear. And then some units that would run around and play the mission. So this list is a similar concept, similar design. There was also, obviously, Allspec Tactics, another content creating channel. And Allspec Tactics recently did a video where we broke down some strong lists, some other factions. Again, I think this was mentioned on the podcast I did with Aidan. And one of those factions, or the one we did for Death Guard, one of those lists was a Threat Rush style one with Death Guard. Now, I put actually something similar already in the Battle Scribe, where the idea was I was going to run through what this list is, where it's lots of things that rush forward and kind of give the opponent a question that they might not be able to answer. Can you deal with all these things rushing at you all at once? And if not, how it doesn't go well for them, basically. It's one of these things where you can just overrun them. Now, of course, there is a downside to Threat Rush lists. Now, sometimes you win big, admittedly, and this is a thing that Threat Rush lists can do. You just, the opponent can't deal with them, and you just, you table them very quickly. Or you don't necessarily table them, but you pin them in their deployment zone, or sort of make it so the game's sort of unplayable from their point of view. The other, of course, is that they have the answer to your skew, have the rock to your scissors, you might say, and they absolutely smash you off the board in 2 turns, and it's a bit disheartening. But at the same time, when you run a skew list, I mean, I'm sure lots of people listening to this already do, or perhaps you're newer to the game and you're unsure what that term is. The downside on the skew, of course, is the fact you can lose big, and you have to sort of accept that. And this is something that I'm going to sort of try and explain. You have to sort of look at your opponent's army, and sometimes you can play around it. This is where sort of play skill does come into it, and where I want to sort of track my journey a little bit, going from someone who went 1-2 an RTT to hopefully going 2-1, and depending on how long we do this series and how popular it either is or isn't, hopefully either maybe some 3-0s and 4-1s at GTs, and maybe even a 5-0 at GT if I get to, if I really get to brush up on my skills. But talking about skew lists, so just to sort of give a bit of info on what they are. A lot of people will know, but a skew list is when you lead heavily into one particular type of data sheet. It could be like a horde, for example, where you just have loads of bodies, and you rely on the fact that a lot of armies just won't bring enough guns to bring down that many bodies before you win the game on points. Or, as I say, the type of list this build is a heavy armor build, where it relies on your opponent not having enough anti-tank guns to deal with it, or if they do have anti-tank guns, as a lot of balanced lists will do, they are left with what you might call a shit sandwich situation, in the sense of they're dealing with this thing at the extent of this other thing, sort of doing damage back at them. So it's kind of you kill this threat at the extent of leaving this one alive, or vice versa. So I'll run through the list, and I'll talk a little bit about it and how it works, and how in my head it plays, and in the practice game I played, how it kind of unfolded, because it felt fun. Now, the reason I like skew lists is because, one, armor's cool. It looks good on the table. It's nice to have big models, as I'm sure a lot of people would agree with, especially with Death Guard and a lot of demon engines. But the other reason is that I like actually to have a lot of movement. I quite like it, having things to move around the board, things that can sort of rush up, and not just things that can stage and wait, and are reactive to their opponent, sometimes putting the pressure on them, making them have to make the first move or react to what you're doing. I quite enjoy that type of play. There's an argument, like I say, that it maybe is a little bit more brain dead compared to, as I say, the more cerebral lists that people play, where it's more kind of like more of a chess game. But at the same time, there are things that threat rush lists do where you do have to make decisions. A lot of decisions are actually, I think, made in the list building phase more than perhaps other lists. But at the same time, once you're on the board, there's still things you have to think about, because when you're playing it to people, sometimes they might not have a full answer at the skew, so they might have some anti-tank guns, they might just not have enough anti-tank guns to completely wipe you off the board. But if you play a bit recklessly and then they get some lucky rolls, it might be that they have enough guns to sort of get the jump on you, and things can go sideways where perhaps they shouldn't have done, or you can make a close game a bad loss. Because this is the other thing, I want to sort of do this series, because the idea is it's fun to play Warhammer. This is why I do it, it's why other people do it. I like competing, I like sort of challenging myself to try and get better. It's one of the reasons I like particularly sort of chasing the faction ranking with Death Guard. It's not because not because I don't care or because I do care, but because it makes it fun. Now, from my point of view, I've never played Death Guard, because when Death Guard's book came out, it was locked down. So I've never played them at a point when they were like top of the meta, sort of bleeding edge. There was other books who come up by the time we were able to play events again. Dark Eldar being an example at the start of 9th. And obviously this edition we've just had a little bit of power. Hopefully when our actual codex comes, we might go even further up the meta. But the reason I'm saying this, when you take Death Guard to an event, it's nice to have a game within a game. For example, at the start of the edition, if you went 3-2 at a GT with Death Guard, you were smashing it. You were doing really well, and you could sort of set your own goals. So go and play within the faction and just looking, rank yourself against other Death Guard players. It's kind of like a game within a game. So say you got like a super major in the UK. Obviously we have the UK TC series. Say there's 7 Death Guard players there, and you're one of them. Obviously Nurgle's number. My 7's a good example to sort of pluck out the air. Say if there's 7 players there, and I might be like, right, okay, I don't know who these guys are. Maybe I know 1 or 2 of them. Just because Death Guard players, you'll talk to each other. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and be the best Death Guard player here. So sometimes, it might be that couple of players go 1 and 4, maybe a couple go 2 and 3. So I'm going to try and get a 3 and 2, and if I do get a 3 and 2, I'm going to try and score more points than the other guy gets a 3 and 2. And if someone goes 1 and 4, or 4 and 1, obviously they'll be better than me, and they'll be the better man, and maybe I'll go and have a sneaky little look at their list afterwards and see if there's anything I can, any sort of clever tech, or even have a conversation with them if they're still in the hall, and you get a chance to sort of speak packing down your models and stuff. So it makes, for me, I find that quite fun and makes it more enjoyable. Whereas I know other people, it's not to sort of say that people can't take out GTs and tournaments with Death Guard, because as Aidan and other people have shown, that it is very possible to do. It's just not something that, at a GT level I've been able to do, especially not a super major. So anyway, I keep going on left and right in tangents. It's one of the downsides of sitting sort of speaking into a computer screen. So hopefully you're all bearing with me, and it's Death Guard content. Hopefully you're enjoying it. But again, if not, this is a side series. This isn't something that's going to be sort of taking over the channel or anything like that. We haven't had a complete change, and me and Aidan will still do the podcast we do normally, and Aidan's obviously still doing the stuff he does as well. But I'll run through this list. I I've talked a little bit, and I feel I've sort of hopefully give a bit of background on the thinking behind this podcast and some of the things that I've thought about with why we've done it, and also why this sort of skew and things is a bit different, something that people might want to sort of talk about, or sort of track my journey with trying to get better at the game. Now it starts with the big man himself. Starts with Mortarion. I'll run through why people are in there once I finish the list. So I'll go back to the top and I'll recap. It's followed by 4 identical 5-man squads of Plague Marines. The Plague Marines, I'll run through their weapons when I run through the deeper dive of why the units are there and what my thinking is behind them. 1 squad of Cultists. 3 Predator Destructors. The Predator Destructors, as I say, I'll come back to them. I know there's 2, and I'm terrible with names. I always remember what data sheets are and describe things about what they do. The Predator Destructor is the one that has the turret gun that fires like an auto cannon shot. So it's 4 flat 3 strength 9 damage that gets rapid fire if you're in half range, rapid fire 2, and also if you're shooting infantry you get an extra 1 AP. Just explain that now because that's something that the top of the name. The rest of it, Death Guard being Death Guard, things are what they are. There's only one type of bloat drone, obviously outside the weapons. A bloat drone's a bloat drone. But I've got 2 bloat drones with flesh mowers. It's 2 rhinos, 2 Death Guard rhinos. 1 Beast of Nurgle. So on allied units now, 1 Beast of Nurgle, I'll explain why he's in there later. 2 3-man Nurgling units, and then 3 War Dog Carnivores, which are arguably the pièce de résistance of the list. They're the sort of the driving force behind it, shall we say. They what make it feel fun. They're very fast and hit very hard. So I suppose talking about the carnivores, I'll go from bottom to top rather than top to bottom, and I'll explain why they're there. So carnivores are good. I like them for different reasons in different lists, but in this particular list, carnivores are good. For example, they went down in points 140. They move 14 inches, which is really fast. They have 8 obsec bodies, which is, means they can sort of hold the primary, and they hit like a truck. They actually hit him harder than Mortarion. They've got 1 more attack than him, and the damage profile on them is way better. The only thing that Mortarion does have over them, I think he has more attacks on his sweep. But apart from that, though, the Carnivore is a superior combat unit. And obviously Mortarion, has his devastating hits and things like that, and you can play some strats in him, because we can't play any strats on the Carnivores, because obviously the Chaos Knight strats do have some really good ones. Chaos Knights we can run through walls. So as I alluded to a little bit earlier in this episode, it might be why Chaos Knights are, why I actually think they are stronger than Death Guard. And this list plays a little bit like Chaos Knights. So, if you're not a Death Guard, die-hard fan, and you are thinking, you're dipping, you're trying to find out how you won, and you're thinking this style list sounds fun, as much as this isn't what the podcast is about, Knights are something to look at as well, because obviously, doing this for all levels. So, the Carnivores are really good, as I say. Now, the Carnivores are the main threat in the list. So, anyone who knows a good player would likely sort of pick up the Carnivores as the thing that need to die first, because they're going to rush at you. The strategy of this little list is built around the Carnivores rushing at you, and can you kill them quick enough before they get there? And if you're killing them, there's other things in the list which are likely surviving and doing damage back at you. So the 2 Nurgling units, 2 3-man Nurgling units, really simple. They're just there to play the mission. Nothing more than that. Play the mission, maybe do a little bit of screening. They have no OC. They also combo nicely with the Carnivores, actually, in some of the units that we'll talk through, because they do have a nice ability where if you're within 6 inches of them, they make an enemy unit -1 to hit in combat, provided it's not a vehicle or a monster. So it helps the combat elements of this list, because this list has actually got quite a lot of combat in it. That's the idea of how it works. And the Beast of Nurgle. The Beast of Nurgle in this list works really well. You just see, I've deliberately stuck to just one character. The reason being, I don't want to give away 2 thick secondaries, Headhunter and Bring It Down, because this is Please Bring It Down. And I also want to make the cards a bit harder. So, if someone draws Assassinate, it's not just some easy points. They've got to kill Mortarion, who is by far the toughest thing in this list to kill. He's not the most lethal thing in this list, and his buffs are a little bit wasted in it because he doesn't have a huge amount to buff. But, they're still useful, and they're still things I'll explain and talk about, I think, some potential tactics of how you could make use of that. 2 Rhinos, just delivery methods for the Plague Marines. Nothing more than that. Then after the Plague Marines have gone, the Rhinos just start driving around the board, either screening things or trying to sort of score me secondaries, spreading contagions, things like that. The Blowthorns and Flesh Mowers, they combo nicely with the Carnivores. Now, this will be on YouTube, so if you're in the comments, feel free to share your thoughts, because what I'm going to say now is probably going to offend a lot of people. I don't think Flesh Mower drones are that good, to be honest. I think they're solid. I loved them in the last edition, but this one, I think the fact that Fly doesn't really work in this edition, and they're still only 10-inch move, I don't think they're as good as what people rate them. And the problem with them is they do hit hard, but they only kill certain profiles. Now, when I say certain profiles, they have 10 attacks, strength 7, so, likely the things you'll be fighting into are going to be strength 4 or 3, depending on, contagions and things like that. But they're really good at killing marine bodies, and they're only OC 2. So say a guardsman, say for example you get a bit unlucky with your rolls, on average dice you should probably miss with 3 of your shots. And then again, on average dice, when you roll in your wounds, you should probably fail a wound. So say you're going to 10 guardsmen. I mean, on your shots, 3 have already lived. Unless they fail the battle shock, they're already holding that point if the Flesh Mower's gone there to try and fight them. But he's still good. He combos nice with Carnivores. There's more things rushing at you. It's more things that if they get in, they're irritating having your lines. They can sort of tag things. Obviously they can hit a vehicle and make it -1 to shoot out if it's there. Obviously that's how this edition works. These are things that we'll talk about probably in later episodes, go into the tactics I've learned throughout the course of playing games. But they combat nicely with the Carnivores. They're not as quick as well, another reason why I don't rate them. I think for the extra 40 points, I think carnivores are better, although admittedly they don't spread contagion, but the blood drones do quite well. So the 3 Death Guard Predators. Now the Death Guard Predators are a weird unit. Now in this list, I really liked them more than I actually expected to. The reason that they're a weird unit is they do hit quite hard, and they're actually probably our best anti-tank in the book, especially the other Predator with the las cannon type turret, the strength 14. Again, terrible with names. I probably should have had the cards out or something in front of me when I was doing this, but the reason I've chose these over the other Predator, because they're in there to give long-range anti-tank, and I'll explain a bit more about that as we get sort of into it. The reason I've chosen it is because I have 2 different shooting profiles. I think you run the risk with a list like this of shooting that just kills armour, and then if you go up against like elite infantry or horde list, you just can't deal with it at range, and you're relying a lot on the combat threats to get in there. Which if the combat threats go, you might end up with just sort of firing last cannons into guardsmen trying to take points back, which it's not going to work. So Predators are really good, but they hit hard, but they're also very much made of paper. A lot of the things they're trying to kill and shoot, if they don't kill it, they'll just get cut in half on the slap back. But the good thing about the Predators is because they are alright at range, they can be swingy. And the third one certainly helps because it sort of levels out the fact they can be a bit swingy. So if one of them whiffs, hopefully the third one will kind of step up and sort of fill that hole for it. So the reason the Predators are good though is because, as I say, they provide that long range threat. So if they're dealing with the carnivores that are rushing up at them, it's that shit sandwich thing I talked about earlier, where the Predators are generally sort of being allowed to like live at the back and sort of shoot. And if you shoot the Predators to take out the long range threat, then the carnivores are coming for you, and that's a big problem. So the Death Guard cultists, 10 cultists, we've talked about in loads of different podcast episodes. They're really good just for that first turn, sticky objectives, forward deploy. On some missions you can hold them in your command phase, means they're sticky from the first turn. They're also quite useful for screening, and they're just cheap. They're just cheap bodies that really you can throw away. I believe you can throw. I think Aidan plays them very much like they're much more precious than I do, which again is difference in sort of caliber of player. Now there are 5 Plague Marine squads. Now I've loaded these Plague Marine squads out a specific way for a specific reason, and I'll explain why that is. And again, in the comments, you're more than welcome to say why this is wrong, because I'm sure as we run through this series, assuming it's got enough interest that we do continue with it. The list will evolve, as I play games. Once I've sort of, once I feel like I've got enough reps with it, we'll look at some changes, and I'll explain through the changes and why the mistakes or things I've learned from the games sort of have influenced them. It's kind of back to basics in some senses, with my thought process. So the Plague Marines, the champion, as every champion probably has in the world at this point, Plague Marine champion, has a plasma gun and a heavy plague weapon, which could be power fist, whatever the model is. And there's 2 with heavy plague weapons. Again, it's just more combat threat. And then there's a guy with a plasma gun. The reason plasma guns is actually there's 2 plasma guns in the squad. It just doubles up on a particular shooting profile. It just makes it more efficient. So when you're picking one target, you're not having to split your fire as much. And then the bit which is very much a tech choice. Again, I feel I should. There you go. I'm actually gonna have to open this up to make sure I'm saying the right one, because there are 2 different sort of flamer type weapons, and I always say the wrong one. I think it's the Plague Spewer. I hope it's a Plague Spewer, because if it's not, I'm sure people will be very angry with me. It's the one that ignores cover and has anti-infantry 2+, with -1 AP. Now the reason that I think this is really good, this particular one, in this build, if you put 2 squads of Plague Marines in a Rhino, you've got the firing deck. So obviously if you do Overwatch, both Plague Marine squads can fire out because they're classed as one unit while they're in the Rhino, because the Rhino is classed as one unit. Unless, of course, I'm wrong. This might be one of these things where I'm educated later down the line and I'm massively wrong on that, but I'm quite sure on that. So the reason being, you basically make a pseudo bloat drone, so you can set the Rhino up and have it in positions where you can overwatch with both flamers and you get the same damage output you would with the bloat drone or a plague burst recorder with spitters, which is quite good. And also, if they are on a point, sometimes they can be sort of good for Overwatch as well, if someone charged a Plague Marine unit. So that was my thinking behind there. And then Mortarion in this list, I know his best role is buffing piece, but as I say with the carnivores rushing forward, the idea is I'm going to try and get from my deployment zone to their deployment zone as quick as I can, or within reason. There will be some games where we play a bit more passive, and I'll talk through those, some of the things. I'll run through how I think this list plays a little bit more after this. Mortarion, he can be a buff, and I think there are some matchups where the buffs that he does where he ignores modifiers and gives reroll ones, I think they will be useful in some matchups, but a lot of matchups I'm actually going to play him more as distraction carnifex. He's going to sometimes, I'm going to play him more as a decoy. Now, this is probably the point where I'll start talking through the attacks for the list. Morty, 9 out of 10 times, sometimes will be the only thing on the line. Maybe the carnivores, because again, the 14-inch move, I don't necessarily have to jink round a wall and lose movement, unless I can deploy and bounce between sort of different staging points and keep them alive, because there's no point in throwing them away to save a few inches if, because obviously something's dead, it's dead, you can't use it, where, it might be usable a turn later if you have to bounce through cover, but again, some of this stuff I'm sure even a new player would understand that. But Mortarion is a bullet catcher. The idea is I win him is, so against certain matchups, say, let's give an example, say Necrons. Necrons have got Doomsday Arcs. Say they decide to take Doomsday Arcs, and that's their only real ranged anti-tank. What I might try and do is, I might deliberately put Mortarion on the line with the Predators in cover, but if they bring anything out to shoot Mortarion, say they bring the Doomsday Arcs out to get the line on Mortarion, I want the Predators in position where they can get lines back on the Doomsday Arc. If Mortarion dies, he's not essential to this list, if I'm to be totally honest, but obviously you don't really want him to die. He's still 325 points. But the idea is if you can get the Doomsday Arcs to shoot at him, maybe to do bring him down, maybe it's to 2, and the Predators can roll out, maybe the Predators can then slap them back and take them both, or take 1.5, whatever. But if that's their main skew, because it's a skew and you can take the things you're going to kill, it means this list is really going to start sort of being able to sort of perform with a bit of impunity. Although Necrons, obviously, it's the primary game and there's other things, it might be that they get the warrior blobs on the objectives, and even though they can't kill me, I'm struggling to outscore them. This is different stuff as we'll talk about more going into it. But Mortarion's role is more to do that. Now, at times when I think he might be a buff is, say, Custodes. The reason being, Custodes fight first. That's what a lot of their army does. So playing into Custodes, with this particular list, the carnivores, they might rush in, they might crash in, but if it's a solid unit, the carnivores might just get pulled down and, they're not there to swing back. So I think you actually probably want to play more of a shooting game into those lists, and whether that's with a flat 3 damage and the turret of those guns comes back in, especially if they haven't built any anti-tank range into their list and they're just planning to sort of brawl or just sort of like stand on a point and hold it. So in that instance, I think Mortarion probably stands with the 3 Predators, and the 3 Predators will hopefully get a line, all 3 on one objective, consistently just shooting the turrets and the last cannons into them, re-rolling ones, ignoring modifiers, just to sort of keep them honest. So then at that point, I might then try and run around the edges and run to sort of skirmish with their smaller units where they can't kill mine, but I can sort of, do a bit of damage to them. Say 2 custodian guards, because I don't know the names of all the units. I'm sorry, this is something that will unfold, and why I'm doing this series, because I'm not as clued up as the factions of the people might be. I learn by doing. So, as other factions come to meta, I'll play against them at tournaments, and then I'll have more of a knowledge on that. But you can get the idea, at least, hopefully, is what I'm talking about with Custodes and why that might be a bit different. Also, the same thing, you can use the Predators to cover stuff. So the idea is that they're a threat, and if you're shooting the carnivores, which that's what you wouldn't want to do as an opponent, the Predators are living with impunity. The practice game I played, the Predators lived all the way through the game, because the stuff that was rushing at his lines had to be dealt with, and the Predators, even though they were by far the easiest thing to actually kill, they were still eating, like a tank shot that really needed to go elsewhere. So the Predators actually were surprisingly MVPs. I chose Predators over Plague Burst Crawlers because of range. The entry cannons I've talked about in previous episodes, I thought they were a bit sad. 24 inches and 2 shots. There just isn't enough shots from them. The last cannons on the sponsons, it means you've got the range on the board, and you can sometimes outrange other anti-tank. And also, it's actually, it's stronger as well. So yeah, I think they're better. And the mortars again, I think you need more, a lot of virulence to sort of. But it's a very different list. It's a very different list idea, and I do probably think it's stronger. If I'm to be totally honest, the first list I wrote was 3 plague burst crawlers and Morty, but as much as I think it's stronger, Aiden's going to talk a lot about that list style, and it's one of these things where maybe as I do this, maybe as I pivot to it, at some point, once I'm sort of talking about getting better, and maybe this list has a ceiling, and I feel I can then sort of exceed, and the list is holding me back, and then we'll start talking about other list ideas and things as part of this series. So petted blowthorns, as I mentioned, they just do the carnivores. Rhinos will often, depending on the mission, be deployed as staging points, just to get the what's actually 9-inch move you can get out of them, really, because in this edition, as I think we mentioned previously, when you jump out, you have to just be within 3 inches, so you can have the back of the base just towing in. Obviously, if it's a plague means it's been base is more than an inch, so you get the 3-inch plus inch, you kind of forward over the 3-inch, within, and then the 5-inch move, which gives you a 9-inch total with plague marines, and then obviously 10 if you really want to advance onto a point. So it means you're kind of fast across the board. You can go and just trade with things, because the plague marines have got enough combat in there that can actually hurt stuff. The heavy plague weapons are good. Hitting on 4s means they're not reliable into hordes sometimes, and there are times when you might just want to stand on the point, not actually engage. Back to the plague spitters. Maybe there's 10 guardsmen on it. 5 plague marines. You just have to kill one guardsman with your plague spitter, and then it's 9 versus 10 in your favour. You take the point. So the plague marines have got utility. That's the idea in them. And the Beast of Nurgle is weirdly tough. Now the Beast of Nurgle is toughness 9, 7 wounds, 5 bimvum, and he has a really good rule at the end of the phase. If he's left with 1 wound or more, he gets all his wounds back. He's pretty much as tough as a rhino. Because he's got an invuln, he's arguably even more tough than a rhino. So he's just good because he can deep strike. He's got a small base, get in a hole. And again, when he gets into a place, OC2 as well, you have to deal with him generally with anti-tank weapons. So if you have to put an anti-tank weapon in the Beast of Nurgle, maybe it's the last cannon. Even if it's 1 last cannon, you have to roll a 6 to wounds. Once you've got 6, because obviously it's 6 plus 1 on the damage, so 7. Anything else, Beast is there from 1 wound, he comes back. So maybe just put 2 last cannon shots in. You might make your 5 bimvum, maybe up to 3 in. And then, you see where I can go with this. So those 3 last cannon shots, that could be a dead predator. That could be a dead carnivore. But obviously they're wasting shots in the Beast of Nurgle. All these leave the Beast of Nurgle, and he goes and stands in a point, and he just skirmishes somewhere. He's quite good over the course of the game, taking out 5 plague marines. He's got damage 2, devastating wounds, I think. Lethal hits and devastating. I'm terrible with the names, as we'll see going forward with this. Ian's not here to correct me. But he's really good in this type of list and heavy armour skew, just because he fits with the skew. And he's a chaff unit, really, that is he going to score you some points? You can get him near someone's deployment zone, maybe he's in a quarter, maybe he's just standing objective. And he's kind of one of these things, at some point in the game, they have to go and deal with him, or they have to just accept you're going to get some easy points. So it's one of those sort of part of the shit sandwich, I guess. It's something that people have enough to deal with. So that's the list, and I've tried to run through why I've sort of put it together. Now again, as I say, there's some tech bits in there. There's some some tactics, running things forward, putting things into firing lanes, trying to bait out their anti-tank to sort of like take out anti-tank with the predators. Morty is really a bullet catcher in this list. He's there to be a distraction carn effects. I want people to shoot Mortarion, because it's actually the carnivores that I see as the real threat. And if they shoot Mortarion, because he's got a much tougher profile than they do, he's much harder to kill. So you could waste. It takes 3 times as much to kill Mortarion as it does to kill a carnivore. So maybe there could be all 3 carnivores dead, whereas Mortarion, takes him on his own, could even live through it because of the way his profile works. And Mortarion, if they do leave him, they do go for the carnivores. If he actually gets into someone's lines on his own, he's got enough OC, he's got enough damage that he can just bounce around and become a problem, because people at that point, when he's so close, sometimes can't deal with him. Now, I talk about contagions. Now, this list really is probably going to be taking the AP contagion, but there are some matchups. It's why the Nurglings are there too, where the Nurglings sort of coming in, maybe the -1 hit does work. Say, for example, going to put a carnivore on a point, maybe there's a dedicated combat unit, maybe Deathwing Knights. I'm going to minus a weapon skill by 1, and then, they're going to make the -1 to hit, so they become a lot less efficient, and, maybe they're going to sort of struggle to sort of get through the Carnivore's armour. Again, I've made these decisions as I'm saying. I'm not saying this is actually what to do. It's just a good example as to how the -2 works, and, Deathwing Knights, maybe that's how you live through them. But realistically, again, if you can put the Deathwing Knights to a 3+ save, get some AP on them, and just shoot through them, or, something like that, that's probably the better. You probably just don't want to engage them in combat at all. But hopefully I've just run through, why it is, and the way that I've sort of thought about this, because as we've said before, now I find this, I think it'll be fun. I think I'll lose some games horribly. Some people have the skew that goes against it, but I think it'll compete. I think there'll be some games I might just run over people, but the whole point in this list isn't necessarily to get really good, and try and have a list that I think is going to, take out GTs and tournaments. The idea, I want a list that's fun, that I can focus on learning the rules of 10th with Death Guard, and get really good at just sort of like the back of my hand knowing the rules and thinking a bit about it. So this episode particularly is just to introduce you to the list, talk about some of the ideas, and then as we get into the later episodes, after I've played some tournaments, I'll try and break down how it went, mistakes, but talk more about the core rules of the game. How this list fits in will be a part of it, because I'm sure people are interested in running skews, and I notice a lot of people running Defilers, for example. I'll have to say with the Defilers, again, commenting below, I do own 3, but I do question how people are running Defilers in certain terrain sets. I know every terrain set's not the same. I'm sure local, if you're playing around your friend's house or the local gaming club, I'm sure some of them are lots of different sets. The WTC set, for example, has a long set where the wall is below 4 inches, so Defilers can step over. But if you say go to UKTC, which is a TT combat set, or say Glassham, one of them, those walls that are less than 5 inches are more than 4 inches. So 4.5, not okay. 3.5, yeah, it does step over it. The reason I say this is I've seen people seem to think they can go over those walls. Now, maybe this is an FAQ. As I said, the whole point of this is kind of a Poxwalker, a Plague Marine kind of thing. I'm a Poxwalker. I'm going to get better. Maybe this is an FAQ that I've missed. I haven't paid enough attention. And they've changed it, so actually 4.5 is fine. But if you are looking at Defilers, they have a huge footprint, and again, especially if you're building them with the spikes, because I've had a discussion with a couple of my friends saying, is it okay to chop the spikes off the legs or claws at the front? Because the spikes are like 1.5 inches long, and that makes them easy to move through things, and we felt that was probably modelling for advantage, because I actually have a one Defiler without spikes. I bought it on eBay, and the spikes had got damaged in the post, and rather than sticking back on, I just took the other ones off, and it looked cool, had some variation. But I'm not sold on Defilers because of the movement, because they're so big. They're like almost a 6-inch circle. And again, I know place in America and lots of the terrain, so you probably play around. So the people who are taking them are probably doing them quite smartly, knowing the terrain they're playing on. But I generally play on the UKTC sets, the TT Combat one, where I don't know how people are deploying them and then moving up the deployment zone, or certainly with more than one. I think there's usually a space to deploy one, but you just have to put them in the open, which again, with this might be fine, because that's the whole point of it. Sometimes you will have matches where you deploy on the line, hope to go first and rush at people. So maybe Defiler is the right way. Maybe I'm being naive, but it'd be interesting to hear that in the comments, because I see a lot of people post his Defiler list. I understand he's really good with a load of virulence, because he's got a blast weapon, and also with the extra AP that we now get, it helps the battle cannons AP 1 out. So I do understand why they're good. I just don't know how people are moving them without either having control over setting the board or misunderstanding that 4.5 isn't okay, because I know the UKTC one has the smaller L's. But again, this is something where I'm learning, so I'd love it if it turns out that I've overlooked something, or people have got a particular tactic that I'm not taking into account. Because, I know rapid ingress you can do, but again, because they've got such a big footprint, I struggle to see where you get them in that's meaningful. Same with the Land Raider. But again, this is stuff that maybe there'll be something I'll come across or think about, or someone will say something, and then I'll try Defiler, and actually that's in the next evolution of the list, because I am going to keep this list the same, definitely for the first RTT I go to. I was going to go one in Leeds this weekend, but there was a train strike in the UK and I don't drive, so unfortunately I am going to have to miss that, come from Manchester. But I've spotted them, and they are going to let me move the ticket to another event. I think they've got one, I think it was the 21st of October. I think that's what it was, top of my head. So if that's what it is, I'm going to try and do that. The week before, I'm doing one at Element Games. It's a Clumsy York one, same thing did the one that me and Aidan played at last time. And then I'm doing a midweek one in Liverpool as well, because midweek just sort of suits me sometimes a bit better for weekends. So another thing I'm going to try next month. So I'm definitely going to take this to the Liverpool one. And then at that point, I might sort of start looking at changes, depending on how I find the game. And this will be part of it, the thought process behind the changes, what I've seen in the games, and the mistakes I made in the games, because this is the whole point of it, and the mistakes with the core rules, not just the list, but the core rules of the game, things I could have done wrong, things I could have done better. I'm going to make an effort to sort of speak on my opponents after the game, especially if I play someone who's like a notably well known within the area. I'll ask them what they think I did wrong, and I'll regurgitate their feedback on the podcast so people can sort of hear. Sometimes I might come across with all this, as a bit of an idiot, in the sense of as if you didn't realise, that's obviously, anyone with half a brain cell would realise that's not the best tactic. Why did you do that? Sometimes I often question myself after these particular instances. I've definitely made some haunting mistakes throughout playing Warhammer, where as I say, I learn by doing. I make some harrowing mistakes where I realise afterwards I don't know why I did that. I mean, I won't go into it right now, maybe it's a later anecdote, but I really horribly threw a game away. There would have been a 4-1 at the point of a good event with good players there, where Dark Eldar in the meta, I beat Dark Eldar, one of the good players in the first round. I beat Admech in the next round. Then the only game I was going to lose was to Matt Robinson when he was on his Sisters run. I played Dark Eldar again. I was so far ahead in that game. I was playing for the table. Something happened. He sort of pulled the play out his arse, and I realised what was happening, but I realised too late, and I still just pushed for the table. Whereas really I should have at that point turtled up, played more defensive, and I would have won by 2. We even added it up at the end of the game, where he was like, why did you do that? And I was like, at this moment, I don't even know. So these are the kind of things where, as much as a good players who are listening to this, probably like, this guy's an idiot. But I understand this podcast might not be for you. The idea isn't, for great players to sort of learn. The idea is more for people who are getting new to 10th, new to Death Guard, to sort of follow someone on maybe the same journey that they're going on. Like I say, I am a competent player, compared to a lot of people, but at the same time, because it's a new edition and I haven't played as much Depth with Death Guards as I should have done, I am sort of, going back to basics, shall we say, picking a list that I think is going to be fun to play, might not be the most competitive, running at the point where I know the list at the back of my hand, so I'm not having to think about how the list does, and I can focus on the rules of the game and trying to have tactics that win me the missions. And again, because these are the things that, they're the fundamentals. When the list changes, when the meta change the list, the fundamentals of playing the game stay the same, even if the actual models in the list and, the exact sort of things do change there. So I think I'd probably leave that there. Like I say, so the next episode of the Discussing Review podcast, assuming this doesn't come out after that, of course, is going to be the LGT recap. And I'm at London. I was going to go to play this RTT next week, so now I can't make it as a train strike to get over the FOMO, fear of missing out, because Aidan and all the guys who were going were pushing me to go, and unfortunately, just through various other things I had going, I was away last weekend and had some work commitments. I couldn't justify it to myself, so I was going to play the RTT just to sort of give me some something to take my mind of it when everyone's posting the groups and talk about who's doing well and who's not doing well. But that being said, we'll do the recap from LGT, and then maybe do a few more of these. And the series with me and Aidan continues as normal. This doesn't change anything. Aidan's still doing the stuff that everyone's been really been doing really well. And thanks to everyone. I know people don't really listen to this podcast for me. I'm not naive. Aidan's results, and Aidan being the guy that he is, such a gentleman to speak to and a gentleman to play against. I know that's why a lot of people tune in. But obviously, I'm sort of more of a co-host. I sort of try and ask the questions that people might be thinking. But this is where I'm going to sort of take the spotlight a little bit and just sort of become the centre of something. Where again, for the people who want to sort of go from being a solid or good player to a better player, it's a journey I'm about to embark on, and you can all sort of follow with. But I think on that I'll sign off, and anyone who's going to be at LGT, very best of luck, especially if you're running Death Guard, and and thank you, and hope to tune in for the next one.